Hi, my name is Lars Murdoch. I'm a health data scientist for the British Heart Foundation Data Science Centre. A large part of my role and the role of my team is building data pipelines for health data research. To do this, we often need to reuse code from previous projects or pipelines, or from each other. It's also important that researchers understand the steps in our code, and that future researchers can follow a similar approach from our code for their own work. After watching this content on reusability, we hope you will understand reusability and its importance, recognize good reusability practices you can adopt, and be well placed to encourage good practices in others. What do we mean by reusability? One of the main strengths of data science and coding is that we're rarely writing something from scratch. Thanks to a healthy culture of open sourcing, most of what we do is adopting commands, functions, and packages, however big or small, that others have already created. The way we write code when we're developing it, however, is very different to how we'd want to find a large amount of code that someone else has written. So reusability is about what practices we can adopt to leave our code as tidy as possible for the next person. Reusability versus reproducibility. It's worth mentioning that there are other modules that have focused on how to share code and how to make sure that your code will run easily, reliably, and consistently with the next user in mind. In particular, there's another module about reproducible coding. How to make sure others can run your code in the same way as you and get the same outputs, even if working from a different computer or environment. In this reusability module, however, we'd actually like our audience to not just be able to run it, but also be able to understand the code. If they understand it, then they can confidently and efficiently repurpose it, maybe even improve it. So rather than the code being used to produce the same outputs, it's being reused for a new task, hence reusability. Why make code reusable? You maybe want to share your code with coworkers or the wider community, or maybe just simplify it for your future self. Returning to an old script or notebook several months later after focusing on other projects in the meantime can be a painful experience where you try to remember certain objects and the purpose of strange-looking coding chunks, maybe even which files are even relevant. Best of all, it's not that difficult to do, especially when you get used to it. The time saved in the long run is more than worthwhile. Finally, don't forget that you've probably used a lot of open source content before where others have made the effort to make their code reusable, so it's worth paying it forward. How to get started? To get into the right mindset for this, sometimes it's best to see unfamiliar code with fresh eyes. This is the way a future user is likely to see yours. You could look at a very old project of yours, ask to see a project that a coworker is working on, or simply browse publicly available ones. GitHub or GitLab and other repository hosting services could also be a good resource for this. You'll notice that a coding project for most people is a folder containing a variety of files. This is sometimes referred to as a repository. These files will primarily be data files, like CSVs, documentation files, like Markdown or text, and most of all, coding files, like R or Python, scripts or notebooks. Consider what your code is for. It's worth considering what your code or project, or the example you're looking at, is actually for. Hopefully that's fairly apparent from the documentation, but some of the following advice may be more or less relevant depending on the use case. Typical examples of where you reuse a project are a package of functions, a pipeline, some data exploration, or maybe even creating a product like a dashboard or a report. There are actually 3 levels you can consider. Because the first thing a user sees, usually when opening a project, is the project folder itself. So we'll start at the repository level, sort of like a bird's eye view, and then zoom in from there. So at the repository level, how you organize and structure the files in your project folder. Or at the notebook level, how you split your code between notebooks and order them. And then, of course, at the coding level, so how you present and annotate individual chunks of code to help users.